As Steve said, I work as a translator, mostly, more than anything else. So I wrote a little strange rambling something last night about forgetting and translation. I will start with an apology, which is that I'm going to read this rather than talk. I normally prefer just to talk. But today in particular, this is appropriate for our theme, slightly suspicious about how well my memory is going to work because I am wildly jet-lagged, kind of extravagantly jet-lagged. And so I'm going to read and hope I can get through the sentences. I've just come back from Korea. Took a moment. I knew it was in there somewhere. Come back from Korea. See, there's the memory going. But I'm going to start somewhere else. Somewhere in La Mancha. Somewhere in La Mancha, in a place whose name I do not care to remember. In a place whose name I do not care to remember, lived a man who something, and I can't recall the next bit. But it's the unforgettable opening of Don Quixote, the translation by John Rutherford or Tom Lathrop or Edith Rosen, I forget which. Translation is often how I, as a translator, enter the world, through languages and the frictions between them. Because no languages map onto each other perfectly, which means that we, translators, are forced to make subtle adjustments to our ways of thinking as we change our modes of expression. Can experience really not be detached from the expression of experience? Or, to put it another way, do we forget the same in different languages? And then if anyone here speaks Italian, when Italians forget, they do it by dimenticare. This is the verb. Dimenticare, which means something goes out of their mind. But I understand that they also have the option of scordare. That's a forgetting in which the thing forgotten is excised not from your mind, but from your heart. Dimenticare or scordare. I don't know how conscious Italians are of the word's origins as they use them, or if they just forget interchangeably. But to an outsider, that latter word seems to express something a whole lot more profound and dramatic, doesn't it? In some languages, in fact, one can't simply forget a thing at all as the object of your sentence. One must forget the thing to oneself. In other languages, the only way of forgetting is, well, it's unremembering. What must that be like? Whole swathes of the world where you can't forget, you can just fail to remember. A failure to do an active thing rather than an active verb in itself. So it can't be one of those kind of pseudo-deliberate acts, as it can in English, forgetting by design, by desire. As you might tonight, even here, say, oh my God, that traumatically bad talk by Danny Hahn, I just want to forget about the whole thing. So it's not merely a failure to recall, a silence that happens at the moment of an unsuccessful attempt at remembering, but an active purging of the thing from the memory bank. One might then choose actively to forget, as Elizabeth I did, ostentatiously with that apocryphal Oxford fart. Or one might choose not to, choose to never forget. In the Millet portrait of Ophelia, she has no rosary for remembrance. Instead, the painter gives her a small, quiet clump of floating forget-me-not. Not that we always have the choice. I'm certainly aware of my own powers of recall, which I thought once quite obnoxiously good, slacking dramatically since about turning 40, and with startling speed. I find myself reaching for things, for words, on the fragile borderlands between memory and nothing. Talking about, that actor we saw, he was in that thing with that woman he used to be married to, that one you like. If my father said that to me incidentally, that would be Richard Brian's. And that's if you work backwards from that. Like anyone with long years of cohabitation behind us, we know how to fill each other's gaps. How pleasing then to be as blasé as that narrator of Don Quixote with that lovely introduction to a place I do not care to remember. How damningly controlled and deliberate that forgetting is. If only it always felt that empowering. There are some parts of the Spanish-speaking world that do have an especially liberating option. They can say not merely, I forgot it, or I forgot it to myself, as it were, but it forgot itself to me. You can get rather indignant about that. The forgetting was not my fault, you understand. You can't blame me for that. It's that thing. That's what did it. You know what it's like, our bloody anniversary, constantly forgetting something. How nice to be able to offload the blame for one's own mental frailties. But besides being increasingly aware of my own forgettings, I find myself lately increasingly aware of things lost to memory, not just my own. When my grandmother died last year, she took her seemingly invincible memory with her. 96 years worth of things remembered and readily retrievable. And now, well, past remembering. Not everything we cannot remember has been forgotten as such. Though most things we encounter do slip, easily, if a little regrettably. Like the name of the man I mentioned at the start, that translator, not Edith Grossman or John Rutherford, the other one, whose name you heard me say and registered in an instant as I said it, but I imagine subsequently, in an instant, forgot it. It can't certainly have mattered much and doubtless failed to take root, meaningfully at least. Which reminds me, a little etymological digression. Forgotten, or forgotten, any Old English people here? Or old English people? Any old English people? Forgiven or forgotten is the Old English word, anyway, and that word is forgetting, which is to say ungrasping, which is to say letting go. And yet, how hard we fight not to. Es tan largo el olvido, wrote Little, that forgetting is so long. Anyway, what was I talking about? Yes, remember, forgetting. Translation, that was it. Great thing of us forgot, as Shakespeare has one of his characters say very implausibly in a line spoken by, well, I forget. Who doesn't? But I remember. What? Well, today I remember the surely unforgettable Ursula Le Guin, in memoriam, who died yesterday. She was one of the first people to generate worlds of writing into which I willingly disappeared, and in which, as in all my favourite things, I forgot myself. I do quite clearly remember forgetting myself, forgetting myself, when inhabiting that writing, losing myself, and being surprised to find myself at the moment of sudden resurfacing. Where am I? Who am I? Which deeply buried recollection brings me just briefly, if only because old reading almost always leads to new writing, to a recent book of my own. A couple of years ago I translated a José Eduardo Aguilera novel called Teoria Geral do Esquecimento, General Theory of Forgetting, you might call it. But I didn't. My book was a general theory, the indefinite article is new, a general theory of oblivion. Are Portuguese forgetting and English oblivion the same thing? Well, obviously not. Obliviously not. My title used the word oblivion because, well, I'm not going to lie to you, because it sounded better. I am playing fast and loose there with my author's forgetting, just because while it doesn't quite mean the same thing, oblivion just tastes really good to say. A general theory of oblivion. Of course, being the title, it didn't mean going back into the bones of the book and retrofitting my rather delinquent version so that oblivion works instead. Dear old oblivion, Noel Coward called it. The whole story of that book is substantially about political memory being obliterated, or people seeking to have their pasts forgotten. Incidentally, we have an EU right to that now, don't we? Proving once again there isn't a subject in the world that doesn't have yet another aspect about being screwed by Brexit about it. You can also almost certainly find a Trump reference, but I'm not going to, I will spare you that. If we can be granted maybe a right to forget certain things rather than forgotten, that's another matter. But while I remember, my little transgression, if that's what it was, my lapse into oblivion, has precedent, I discovered. The great Milan Kundera novel, not that one, the other one, is called, in Michael Henry Hahn's famous translation, if memory serves, which this time it does, The Book of Laughter and Forgetting. Which Kundera's language for this is different too. His Czech word that's been rendered as forgetting is, and again my pronunciation is fantastically approximate here, zapomnienie, which is not a verb for the process of gradual forgetting, but the state of having been utterly forgotten. The dictionary gives again oblivion, which is the same and not the same. That is translation all over. And Kundera's zapomnienie contains the word for memory at its root. It's the book of laughter and having been unmemoried. Michael Hahn's title is better, more memorable perhaps. My own single favourite paragraph from any of my Agualuz novel translations is about memory and how a long-forgotten memory can resurface uncalled for at the most unlikely moment. And I'd like to end by recalling that paragraph for you. From memory, if it works. Because it's one of those pieces of writing that wired itself into my brain early on, and I can't imagine ever forgetting, though the time will surely come. The scene, very briefly, is a man driving through the desert shortly after the Civil War, isn't enough years from Angola. And he stops in a cafe, and he, middle of nowhere, middle of the desert, and he starts talking to the guy behind the counter. And it becomes clear from their conversation that at some point in the Civil War, this is the man who had killed his father. So our narrator goes outside and sits down in the sand just to kind of clear his head, and just to kind of process what's just happened to him. And this is the guy who comes out of the cafe. He's also just figured out what this connection is, and he offers his hand to the narrator in penance, in something we don't quite know. And this is what happens next. I took his hand, a broad, bony hand, a little calloused. I noticed his face properly now. He had light eyes, hazelnut coloured, clean and sincere, with little wrinkles at the corners, deep bags under his eyes. He reminded me of an old turtle I had in my childhood. He went by the name of Leonardo because he really liked listening to Leonard Cohen. Sometimes he'd disappear for weeks, but to bring him back, all he had to do was put on a record of the Canadian singer. And the first lines of Famous Blue Raincoat. It's 4 in the morning, the end of December, I'm riding it out to the sea. But Leonardo would emerge from some unknown abyss somewhere, still dragging behind him the torpor of a long sleep. He'd get up onto his back legs next to one of the columns, he'd stretch out his neck, and for a few moments, seemed to be completely happy. Then he went back to being sad again. A sadness like the sadness of the deserts. This man in front of me now, he looked like Leonardo looked, the turtle, when the music came to an end. Anyway, where was I?